The room was buzzing with laughter, but it wasn't for me. My stepsister Ashley leaned into the microphone, grinning like the queen of the world, and said, "This is my stepsister, just a useless nurse." The words cut through me sharper than I expected. Every face at the wedding dinner turned in my direction, eyes flicking with amusement, pity, and a little sneer. I felt my chest tighten and my hands clench under the table, trying to stay composed. My parents chuckled softly, like they had heard this joke 1,000 times, and it didn't matter that it was me. But that wasn't the worst part. If you enjoy this story and it speaks to your heart, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know the city or country you're watching from and the local time there. Only if this story truly resonates with you. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 28 years old, and tonight was the night that changed everything in my family. This was supposed to be my stepsister's perfect wedding, a celebration of love and joy, but it quickly became a glaring spotlight on everything I had been made to feel invisible for. And now, sitting here with a champagne glass trembling slightly in my hand, I can't help but remember how it all started. Back when I was just a girl trying to find a place in this family that never really wanted me. After Ashley laughed and walked away, I stayed seated at the end of the long table, my heart pounding, watching everyone else continue the celebration as if nothing had happened. The crystal chandeliers glimmered above, throwing light across the polished oak, and it all felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's story. My parents were smiling at her, whispering compliments but not a word for me. I poured myself another glass of water and stared at the place setting in front of me, the silverware lined perfectly, a small napkin folded in a triangle. I remembered how many times in the past I had been left out of family events, dinners, and photo opportunities, moments that seemed small to them but carried the weight of years for me. I had always been the one to clean up after parties, run errands, and manage small details no one noticed, but tonight it felt magnified, the contrast between Ashley's perfect image and my own invisible existence laid bare for everyone to see. My Aunt Margaret leaned over, whispering something about how beautiful the flowers looked, and I nodded, but her words could not erase the sting of humiliation. I thought about all the nights I stayed late at the hospital, tending to patients, learning, and proving myself in a world that valued my skills far more than my family ever had. Yet here, in this moment, none of that mattered. I felt a quiet anger simmer beneath the surface, a slow-burning fire built from every birthday, every graduation, every Thanksgiving I had been pushed to the margins while Ashley thrived in the spotlight. I noticed the groom's father, Mr. Robert Wright, sitting across the room, adjusting his tie, eyes narrowing slightly as if he were noticing something he had forgotten. I did not move, did not speak, but a flicker of recognition passed between us in the silence of that frozen moment. The waiter brought a tray of champagne flutes, and I mechanically accepted one, my fingers brushing against the cold glass as I set it down again, unsure where to look. I thought about the countless times my parents had dismissed my accomplishments, the words they never said, the encouragement they never offered. I thought about the way Ashley had always been treated like a golden child, her successes celebrated loudly, her failures gently excused, while I had learned to navigate the world quietly, independently, proving my worth in the eyes of strangers but never in the eyes of my family. As the chatter continued, a hush seemed to settle over the table for a fraction of a second, the kind that signals something unspoken, a tension that had been building for years. My mind wandered to my first day at the hospital, the long shifts, the moments I had held hands and calmed fears, the lives I had been trusted with, the respect earned from colleagues who truly saw me, and I realized that those years had shaped a version of me they could not dismiss, a version of me that would not be invisible tonight. I felt my back straighten, my jaw tighten, a resolve settling in that had been forming quietly for years, a determination that this evening, this wedding, would be remembered not for Ashley's words, but for the truth that had always been there, hidden in plain sight. I sipped my water, feeling the tension in my shoulders, and prepared myself for the moment when the world would finally have to see me, for the moment when the recognition of my presence, my skills, and my worth would ripple through the room, a quiet but undeniable revelation that would shift everything in its path. As the evening progressed, the laughter around me felt heavier, more pointed, but I kept my hands folded in my lap, my eyes scanning the room without really seeing it. The groom, Daniel, was talking with his friends, unaware of the storm that was about to unfold at the edge of his own celebration. I remembered the countless nights I had worked double shifts, pulling patients through critical moments, often being the person who made the difference when everyone else thought it was hopeless. The irony of it hit me hard. Here I was, the one who had saved lives, treated emergencies, and earned the trust of people who mattered. Yet in this family, my worth was reduced to a throwaway title. I could feel my heartbeat, steady yet intense, as I watched Ashley pose for photos with our parents, their smiles wide, their approval loud, while I remained on the fringe, a quiet observer. My mind replayed old memories, the family dinners where my ideas were ignored, the graduations where applause went to someone else, the holidays where I was always the invisible helper, but none of those moments prepared me for the weight of tonight. The waiter brought a tray of hors d'oeuvres, and I took one without looking, my focus entirely on the subtle shift I noticed across the table. Mr. Robert Wright, the groom's father, had turned slightly toward me, his expression a mixture of curiosity and recognition, and I felt a flicker of hope ignite. Every conversation, every clink of glasses seemed to slow, and the room felt suspended in a bubble of tension. I caught a glimpse of my parents whispering to each other, proud of Ashley, oblivious to the story unfolding in their own home. I thought about the years I had sacrificed to prove myself in a world that often underestimated me, about the promotions I had earned quietly, about the patience I had comforted and the trust one had built, and I realized that this night was about to become the stage where all of that unseen effort would finally matter. My shoulders straightened, my posture firmed, and I allowed my gaze to meet Mr. Wright's directly. His eyes lingered, narrowing slightly as if he were piecing together a memory he had not fully recalled until now. The chatter around us continued, but I felt a calm clarity settle over me. A sense of readiness I had never allowed myself to fully acknowledge before. I remembered a particular incident last year, in the intensive care unit, when Mr. Wright had been admitted unexpectedly, and I had been the one to notice the subtle change in his vitals that no one else had seen. My instincts had saved him, and the realization that he might finally recognize me in a public, undeniable moment gave me a quiet confidence. I sipped my water slowly, letting the cool liquid ground me, letting the familiarity of my own presence within my own body reassure me that I was ready for whatever came next. The room was still, the pause in the collective noise giving space for a shift, a change, a recognition of what was real versus what had been assumed. I could feel the energy in the room begin to alter, a ripple moving outward from the small bubble of tension where Mr. Wright and I held each other's gaze. My thoughts raced through the past, through every slight, every dismissal, every subtle act of undermining, and I realized that all of it had prepared me for this precise moment, the one where the truth of my life and my efforts would finally intersect with the perception of others. The laughter that had been aimed at me moments before felt distant, almost surreal, as my attention remained fixed on the man across the room who now seemed to remember, to understand, and to connect a thread that had been invisible to everyone else. I knew that the next few seconds would change everything in the room, that the recognition when it came would shift the balance, and I allowed myself to breathe, to anchor in that moment of calm before revelation, feeling the weight of years, the quiet perseverance, and the steady accumulation of all the skills, choices, and care that had led me here, ready to be acknowledged at last. Mr. Robert Wright's eyes widened as he stepped forward slightly, his hand resting on the back of his chair as if to steady himself. I held my posture, letting the weight of the years I had endured settle into a calm, steady presence. The room around us continued in a muted hum, glasses clinking and whispers traveling from one end to another, but the energy between us became its own gravity, pulling the attention of a few nearby guests without them even realizing why. I could see the recognition flicker in his eyes, the moment when memory met reality, when he connected the quiet nurse he had relied on during a critical moment to the woman standing at the edge of this celebration. Ashley, still unaware, leaned in to compliment someone across the table, and I realized she had no idea what was about to happen. My parents continued their forced smiles, proud of her, oblivious to the subtle shift. I could feel my own pulse in my ears, steady, composed, yet alive with anticipation. Mr. Wright's gaze softened and his voice, quiet but firm, reached across the table. "Emily, you were there when no one else was. You made sure everything turned out right." A hush spread, guests leaning in, sensing something significant without yet understanding. I kept my expression calm, letting the story of my past deeds and quiet dedication reveal itself naturally through his words. The way he recounted small details, moments that had gone unnoticed by everyone else, painted a picture of someone who had quietly carried responsibility, who had acted with skill and compassion in situations that others could not comprehend. The room seemed to hold its breath as the implication sank in. The nurse they had all laughed at had been the anchor in a critical moment, the person whose actions mattered far more than appearances, titles, or the shallow judgments of a family obsessed with image. I noticed a few heads turn toward Ashley, confusion and disbelief mingling with a sudden recognition that perhaps they had underestimated the person they had so casually dismissed. My own family members shifted uncomfortably, their smiles faltering as they realized that the woman they had minimized, mocked, and overlooked was, in fact, someone of undeniable value. Mr. Wright continued, recounting the precision, care, and calm under pressure I had shown, every word reinforcing the contrast between perception and reality. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from revenge but from the simple acknowledgment that the truth of my actions could no longer be ignored. Ashley's mouth opened, closed, and opened again, words failing her as she finally registered the weight of what had been revealed. The guests around us murmured softly, exchanging glances, sensing the magnitude of the moment, the reversal of roles and expectations. I remained composed, allowing the realization to unfold naturally, letting every small detail of my dedication speak louder than any protestation could. My parents' expressions shifted from pride in Ashley to a mixture of surprise, disbelief, and a faint recognition of the oversight that had lasted so long. The air seemed heavier, charged with the collective understanding that the woman at the edge of the table had not only earned respect but had claimed it in a way that no laughter or dismissal could ever undo. I sipped my water slowly, letting the calm presence settle over me as the room gradually absorbed the new reality, the quiet, undeniable proof that years of overlooked effort, professionalism, and quiet courage could not remain invisible forever. Every glance, every pause in conversation, every subtle nod toward me carried the weight of acknowledgment, and I knew that the shift had occurred. The person they had dismissed was now seen, understood, and valued in a way that no words of mockery could ever reverse. And in that quiet, suspended moment, I felt the culmination of all those years of persistence, skill, and integrity manifest fully, not as triumph over others, but as the undeniable truth of my own worth, recognized at last by those who mattered most in that room. The room had fallen into a stunned silence, the kind of quiet that stretches for a moment too long, where every subtle movement feels magnified. I could feel the tension in the air, heavy and expectant, as all eyes shifted between Mr. Robert Wright and me. The words he had spoken earlier lingered like a quiet echo, and for the first time in years, I sensed that the years of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated were converging in a moment that demanded acknowledgment. Ashley's smile faltered as she turned to follow his gaze, confusion washing over her face when she realized that the playful insult she had thrown earlier was no longer funny. My parents exchanged nervous glances, the warmth in their smiles replaced by the subtle recognition that the dynamics they had long maintained were suddenly unsteady. I took a slow breath, letting the calm I had cultivated over years of long shifts and quiet dedication anchor me as I prepared to meet the unspoken questions that hung in the air. Mr. Wright leaned forward slightly, his expression softening, and in that instant, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Respect, acknowledgement, and a trace of gratitude that cut through the haze of humiliation that had surrounded me for so long. I remembered every early morning, every late night, every moment I had spent in the hospital anticipating the needs of others, while my own accomplishments were minimized or ignored. It was in those moments, working tirelessly, that I had honed skills and built a reputation entirely independent of the validation from a family who had never truly seen me. And now, in the hushed atmosphere of this wedding dinner, all of that unseen effort was being recognized, quietly but undeniably, in the weight of a single look and a few measured words. Guests shifted in their seats, sensing the subtle shift in power, the reversal of expectations, and the undeniable truth that the person they had assumed to be insignificant had been the one with competence, judgment, and integrity that mattered most. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from revenge, but from the validation of years of perseverance and dedication, a proof that could not be dismissed. The murmurs of recognition spread slowly, like ripples in water, touching those closest and eventually reaching the edges of the room, carrying with them a mixture of astonishment and newfound respect. Ashley attempted to regain control of the narrative, opening her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat as the reality of the situation settled firmly into place. I could see the realization spreading across the faces of my parents, the subtle acknowledgment that they had misjudged me, that the accomplishments they had ignored were real, tangible, and impactful. I remained composed, allowing the moment to fully breathe, letting the story of my unseen labor, my quiet resilience, and my steady commitment speak for itself in a way that no argument could compete with. Mr. Wright's gaze met mine once more, and I felt a quiet, steady confidence that had taken years to build, the kind that comes not from arrogance but from an understanding of one's own worth and the knowledge that it could no longer be denied. The room, still suspended in that delicate balance, seemed to exhale as the significance of the recognition sank in. Every glance, every subtle movement, every whispered remark now carried a weight that was undeniable, a shift in perception that would linger long after the wedding dinner ended. I knew that in this moment the balance had changed, that the narrative had been quietly rewritten, and that the truth of my abilities, my dedication, and my integrity had finally pierced the veil of ignorance, reaching the eyes and hearts of those who had once dismissed me. I took a final slow sip of water, feeling the weight of years lift slightly, replaced by a sense of acknowledgment and the quiet assurance that this moment, however brief, was a turning point not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself and the value of the life I had built through persistence, skill, and unwavering resolve. The weeks after the wedding felt strangely calm, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis. I returned to my apartment, unpacking the small suitcase I had brought, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of space to breathe. The walls around me no longer seemed to press in, and the nights felt quieter, filled with reflection rather than anxiety. I started to notice the little freedoms I had overlooked, the soft morning light in my kitchen, the sound of distant traffic, the way I could make decisions without weighing every potential judgment. The events of that evening had not erased the past, but they had marked a turning point. A quiet recognition that my worth was not defined by others, that I could stand firmly in my own achievements and integrity. I realized that boundaries were essential, that self-respect is not negotiable, and that healing comes from honoring one's own journey, rather than seeking permission from those who never understood. To anyone listening who feels unseen or underestimated, I want you to know that your value is inherent, not dictated by anyone else's words or actions. You can choose to define yourself, to protect your heart, and to embrace your own strength. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen, for allowing my story to be a companion in your own journey, and for letting us share a moment of empathy that reminds us none of us are truly alone. If this story touches you, I would love to hear about a moment when you discovered your own strength. Please leave a comment sharing that experience. If it speaks to your heart, gently tap like and subscribe, and know that you are seen. Emily Carter, 28, and the lesson I want to leave you with is, your worth is defined by you, not by anyone else.